agriculture status. Yesterday, in the last class when we were discussing this topic, we had to stop there because time was over. So we'll begin there again. See, this is a combination of whatever we discussed in NCERTs and also the present status. What is already there in NCERTs and the order of how you have to mug it up, that is already given here. I will not be elaborating that part. So just putting it here so that all of the information is at one place. Moving away from that, what are the other areas that you ought to know? Some facts. Institutional and the policy framework, we were discussing this part. Anything that has got to do with trade is under Ministry of Commerce. I told you already. So anything that has the name board in it, anything that has the name board in it, usually people tend to think that it is under Ministry of Commerce, but this is an exception. We already discussed this part. So what are the other schemes that you have to know? Silk Samarth and Silk Mark. One is with respect to quality, the other one is with respect to the capacity building, just to bring out more efficiency in the sector. These two initiatives you have to remember. Now, yeah. So, you have to remember that silkworms are very sensitive to climate. The different categories of silk that you see, the worms grow in specific climatic zones only. And they feed on certain leaves. Okay? Usually when you think of this sericulture, one aspect that we tend to ignore is how central this is to the lifestyle of even tribes also. But the problem is, whether it is in the northeast or in other areas, the predominant quality of silk is the mulberry, which is very expensive. Even though the other varieties are equally good in terms of the properties, the quality and the thermal properties they have, they are not getting the due recognition they deserve. Okay, it is in this context you have to know something called Vanya silk. Vanya silk basically refers to all the non-mulberry varieties. Just if you ever get a term like Vanya silk, you have to remember this point. Just note it down. Then we were talking about the livestock census. Right. So our economic survey says that when you take a look at the entire agriculture sector, or rather the three sectors of economy, what are they? Primary, secondary, and finally services. Okay, tertiary sector, majorly services, and within the primary sector, agriculture is one component, agriculture and allied. What does this allied sector constitute of? Animal husbandry, sericulture, horticulture, all this will also come into the picture. Crops is only one of the segment. Please don't make this mistake equating crops with entire agriculture and allied sector. Okay, in the calculation of your GDP, GVA, all these components are also a part of them. Okay, yesterday we were seeing how in the entire sector, it is actually animal husbandry, fisheries, everything except crops that were contributing to the growth of our agriculture sector. This year's survey was talking why this is happening. Why is our crop sector witnessing a upper threshold? This is not an old problem. Okay, we will be before going to the animal husbandry part, I will also clarify why crops are hitting a certain threshold. Now, when I'm talking about crops, we are talking about our usual idea of intensive agriculture driven by our government policy. Now, in India, whenever we take a look at agriculture as a business, multiple times we have discussed, it is not a remunerative one because the input cost is very high when compared to the output revenue generated. Because of this market failure scenario, the government has to intervene through interventions like MSP, where unlike any other commodity, any other business, where we will be trying to attain the maximum retail price, MRP, here we are competing for a minimum price. And this year's economic survey for the first time recognizes this market distortion created by government policies. And there is no other way for India to fix this agricultural sector without acknowledging our constraints. What are the constraints recognized by economic survey? There are twofold. One, the land that we have, you can't increase it anymore. Officially, for the first time, our survey recognizes that we have hit a threshold when it comes to farmland. Second, water resources. Here also, we have hit a threshold. There is water crisis that is increasing, land degradation that is happening. And economic survey for the first time this year recognized it is not only having an economic cost as well as an environmental impact. If we have to address both those areas, we have to shift our attention not only from crops but also towards animal husbandry, which will compensate for the loss that we are seeing here. Okay, that is one. Second part, how do we fix this sector? Because right now we agreed that it is inefficient. Okay, when I say it is inefficient, take a look at the input side. You have seeds, you have land, you have irrigation, every other component that is a part of this input side, like fertilizers, etc. Every single area there is inefficiency, not a new story. What survey for the first time, again I'm highlighting first time, because this is not common from the government side to acknowledge this kind of things. So they realize that there is no other way except to move away from this subsidy regime, to move away from this inefficient mode of production and focus on only one thing, productivity. How do we increase this productivity? It is not a single line answer, because when you are talking about inputs, you are talking about seeds, you are talking about fertilizers, you are talking about how much credit access you will have, what kind of insurance you will get, what kind of mechanization you will get. All these factors will together decide your productivity. So this is the major focus of our economic survey discussions this year. Before we go there, now that you have a context of why we are emphasizing more on animal husbandry, in the short term, we will try to understand the nuances of animal husbandry very carefully. So I'm expecting one question here. Last year also in the 2025 prelims, you've had a question on Rashtriya Gokul Mission. Please pay attention now to these aspects. Okay? So when you want to know about the livestock, there are two aspects to that. How many cattle are there? What is the status of production? Two different aspects. These two different aspects are handled by two different sources of statistics. One is the livestock census, which happens once in 5 years. The other one is the basic animal husbandry statistics, which the ministry comes out with. Okay? So the latest data that we have right now is the 20th one only, 2019. We are yet to get the updated census. So till the exam, we will be sticking to these numbers only, or any other numbers that our survey gives. Okay? So again, what am I not expecting you to do? I don't want you to remember numbers. You have to understand the larger problem statement, because policy choices or the steps taken by the government are decided by what problems that sector faces. Okay? So let's understand the problem statement first. If you want to increase revenue out of livestock and animal husbandry, at this standpoint, at this present moment, these are the problems. Okay? The rate of growth is very slow, especially the indigenous cattle. That is the trend number one. There is skewed ratio. The number of males in cattle are reducing because they are diverted to the farms. As a result, the quality of production or the offspring is coming down, which necessitates artificial insemination, crossbreeding, and other kinds of technologies which will improve the vitality of this indigenous breed. That is problem number 2. Then, usually where will UPSC confuse you? When we say we have this kind of schemes, we tend to believe that indigenous cattle are increasing. Reality is, even today, the exotic breeds or the crossbreeds, they are producing the maximum number of offsprings and also the cattle. You remember these trends? This is the most important thing. Second thing, from this statistics, what should you remember? The actual production numbers. So if you take a look at the entire table here, the most prominent one is milk. Yesterday we were just discussing this. India is the leading producer of milk. Okay? But again, what is the trap here that you should remember? Just because you are a leading producer, it doesn't necessarily mean you're also a leading exporter. In fact, India is the 49th ranked country when it comes to exports of dairy. First is New Zealand. Please remember this. Second, eggs, poultry industry. In this context, I want to slightly digress and tell you one small story. It's not a story, it's also another news. Around October, November, somewhere around that time, ICMR came up with a study citing that 62% of Indians do not have enough access to protein. We are eating a very carb heavy diet. Okay. So this has certain implications to our health. In the long term, it will increase our health cost also. That is why if you take a look at the development of a child from the time they are born till they are adults, especially in the early childhood stage, midday meal scheme will definitely have a protein component, and whoever will eat egg will get access to egg or lentils or soya, because protein deficiency should be addressed in the midday meal scheme. This is the major component. Slight digression, but anyway, coming back. These are the important things I need to know. Right. Economic survey, what does it tell you about the animal husbandry sector? Some statistics. Don't have to memorize the numbers, just remember the trend. When we are talking about the entire agricultural growth, even today, 46 to 47% of the population depends on agricultural sector only. And when such huge population is depending on it, and inflation, price rise is happening, there is no other choice for the sector to grow. You don't have a choice, otherwise you can't beat inflation. When the crop sector is growing at 4% and inflation is at 5%, you are essentially losing money. So what compensates for that? Animal husbandry. Survey says that nearly 30.2% of the total agri GVA came from this sector. But do we have a problem in the sector? Yes, of course we have. One is the epidemics within the animals, namely lumpy skin disease and foot and mouth disease. Okay, if you see a statement citing that there are no such kind of diseases in animals, or if you see that it is not going to have an impact, the diseases will not have an impact on human health, just eliminate that statement, because you don't know. We don't have an established research on how zoonotic diseases behave. So it is in this context you have to remember one more term called One Health approach. One Health approach treats both animal health as well as human health as one. Why is this? I don't have to explain. COVID pandemic already showed why. Okay? World Health Organization in 2017 brought this concept for the very first time. Anyway, coming back. So Apart from this, in the last many years, you will notice whether it is the dairy industry or the poultry industry, the cost of feed for animals increased significantly. If you take the case of dairy, from 1970s till now, you almost had 395% increase in the cost of the feed. Now, India, especially in the poultry sector, started depending on imports from US, from just like how other countries like Europe, etc., even they were depending on cheap dump of the soya bean variety from US. This has been a point of contention between India and US too in the ongoing trade tussle. Madhya Pradesh farmers, who are actually the largest producers of soya bean and also had export markets in Africa, they were also complaining to the government that their prices are crashing because our domestic market for soya is not that high. If trade tariffs are imposed by US, this production will lead to a price crash domestically. Now, do you see the logic of saying we have to diversify our export markets? See how intricately the lives of people in remote villages of Madhya Pradesh are linked to US foreign policy. And at the heart of this is the globalization logic, which is now failing the average Indian consumer as well as the producer. The globalization story is on a back foot now. What do we do? What do you think we should be doing? The government already gave one idea for this. What do you call that idea? Yes? Atmanirbharta. Self-sufficiency as well as serving our domestic needs and then slowly diversifying our markets, which traditionally we were depending on a fixed markets like Europe, US or South Asia. Southeast Asia and South Asia. Okay? In today's world, especially it is in this context, the South-South diplomacy becomes more important. Because if you want to contain the global volatility, at least in the agricultural commodities, we have to develop trade pacts with not only the rich nations like EU, or I would rather say the bloc EU, but also strive towards creating synergy with the so-called developing countries and the LDCs, least developed countries. Because it will give you two kinds of advantage. One, it will give you a bargaining power in the global fora at a future standpoint. Second thing, it will also give you markets for products which have low value. So agriculture commodities, if you see, not all of them will have the same price. If this is the spectrum, this is expensive, this is cheap. You have export markets even for this variety too. In the event of a price crash, we can tap into this provided our integration into the global value chains is pretty strong. What do you mean by global value chains? Imagine if you have a logistics sector. Imagine this is Mumbai, right? Okay. If Mumbai has connections to entire Indian Ocean islands where the markets are expanded, maybe through Mumbai, through Tuticorin, through other Chennai based ports, we can export these commodities to those areas. Right? This is one thing. Second thing is, when you're talking about the expensive, high ticket products, let's say for example, in the horticulture sector, you're talking about fruits and vegetables. Right? These fruits and vegetables have a very low shelf life. If you can link this to food processing industries, we have markets across the world because we have almost all kinds of agroeconomic zones in our country that the world has. Okay? Combine that with marketing power. This is what survey is telling us. Now, what are the points that you have to remember? Let's go back. All right. Now, if I have to give you some quick facts about our dairy sector, like we discussed, India is the largest milk producer, but here are some statistics. We already discussed some of them, so I'm not talking about them. Let's go back to the points given in our post-independence NCERT textbooks. One of them will be the White Revolution or the Operation Flood. What is this? It's about the growth story of Amul. How a group of farmers came together, collected the milk, created the revolution that Amul today is, and transformed the entire country's perception towards what cooperative sector can do. Right. And the personality that you have to remember, you can use this person as an example in ethics also, leadership qualities. Dr. Verghese Kurian. And this is called the Anand model. You know, in fact, just an interesting insight. If you ever come across a roadblock in terms of how this kind of a rural commodity, if it has to gain national traction, what should you do? We have an answer in how Amul marketed itself in the initial days. Dr. Verghese Kurian collected 2 rupees from every farmer, produced a movie about the growth story of Amul, and it was directed by Satyajit Ray, if I'm not wrong. Shyam Benegal or Satyajit Ray, one of them. Satyajit Ray, if I'm not wrong. Okay? And it expanded into various states on the same model. Today, the same cooperative-led model is now becoming a scaling story or a role model for other sectors also. You have to see that. Anyway, moving forward. Some traps that you have to avoid. This is neither a subsidy-driven model. This is not a private sector-led model. This is not any government institution taking care. It is purely a cooperative model. However, there is one institution called the National Dairy Development Board, which oversees the entire dairy sector. The current affairs that you have to talk about in this context is how NDDB has taken some initiatives to digitize the entire unorganized sector of dairy, so that it brings efficiency into the value chain. The global supply chain integration is a long-term agenda, but the problem that immediately it solves within our country is majority of the milk farmers are unorganized. So to bring them onto a common platform, this initiatives will help. So also one more thing, National Livestock Mission. This is a scheme brought out by the government of India. What will this scheme ideally do according to you? What should it do? Like I told you, we have a problem when it comes to the indigenous variety. We have to protect them. Of course, they will give you low yield, but those are the same animals which will act like an insurance for poor farmers in the event of a drought. Their energy demand, like they would require low maintenance too. So in a world where the influence of climate change is increasing significantly, taking care of the indigenous breeds is exactly what we have to focus on. It's like a nature's insurance against climate change. Apart from that, you also have to parallelly try to make the exotic breeds much more efficient in terms of production, or this has got nothing to do with importing cattle or giving any funds. Look at the statements in the exam. If the paper setter says that this is about giving funds to import cattle, no, that's not the job of this regulatory. It's not a regulatory body. I would rather say any administrative body will try to make the sector much more efficient. If it has to give finance, you already have banks for that. If you think this is a big enough sector, we will open a non-banking financial company exclusively for this sector. But just be careful when government schemes will talk about funding directly. Okay, look at the intent of the scheme. Now again, if you have to see the average yield trend, depending on various regions, if you have to put the same exotic breeds, indigenous breeds and buffaloes, in some areas this will change, but largely speaking, exotic or crossbred cattle will give you much more milk than desi breeds. Clear? Moving forward. I've already discussed all of this. Now, so if you want to develop this sector, which we will be coming back again when we are dealing with the points given in the economic survey, this first point will become very important. If you want to know what animal is there, just like how human beings have had an Aadhaar card for your identity, even animals are now getting a digital identity. This is the first step taken by NEDB. Moving on. So if you want to establish a complete supply chain which will formalize the sector, these are the various layers that you have to focus on. How will you automate milk collection or reduce the friction in identifying the sources of our milk collection? Then dairy operations, enterprise resource planning. What do you mean by this? Let's say you are running a factory. Okay. Where will you get your suppliers from? How much quantity? When will they go out? How much stock is there in inventory? How to send them out? Where are the distributors? At what price are we selling? Are we getting the payments on time? Where will you get all this? On the ERP system. So the government created that ERP system. Remember, ERP doesn't mean GIS. A lot of candidates get confused. ERP system can be used for uploading a geotagged image of some asset, but it doesn't mean ERP and GIS are the same. What do you mean by geotagging? Let's say you are a government officer and you are supposed to go and upload a photo of the work done there. That location as well as the photo will be uploaded on a public portal for social audit. That is geotagging, something that you see in Manrega. Okay, that is one aspect. Don't confuse that geotagging with ERP. The context is different, the need is different. Don't get confused, because many candidates, when they're talking about this, they think it is GIS. It's got nothing to do with GIS. Just because there are 3 letters, don't get confused. Okay. So again, the entire breeding supply chain, or creating a database of the cooperatives in this country, or based on how we have to store our milk, for what time, this spatial logic, here GIS will come into the picture. Because if you can create coordinates, just like how on a GPS map, like on a Google map, you can put your location and that will automatically create an estimate of how much time will it take to reach the nearest factory. All this kind of setup is now being taken care here. So my intent is to tell you that there is one initiative by our government to formalize the hitherto non-formalized dairy sector. If you see any such options, please be careful. You don't have to mug up all this data. Moving forward. Now, if you go to the economic survey, our economic survey begins by saying that we have hit a threshold when it comes to agriculture. Okay? We have seen how animal husbandry sector initiatives are supposed to address the short-term problems and slowly integrate them into the long-term strategy. Survey also says that at every point we have to make the process much more efficient, whether it is seeds, fertilizers, so on and so forth. In this subsequent parts, we will see what is the problem statement, what is the government's proposed agenda, and how to remember that for our prelims exam. Clear? All right. Area expansion is no longer available. This is the problem statement. So what should we do? Yield improvement through advanced technology and sustainable practices. This is what the survey says. Now, what are those sustainable practices? What are those technologies? That will be the subsequent parts. Now, here you have to focus on how UPSC can confuse you. What is the trap? Okay. If you are unaware of the trend in economic survey, if you have not read economic survey at all, or your traditional wisdom is with which you are going to the exam hall, this statement can look possible. Expansion of cultivated area can be the primary driver of future agricultural growth. I will replace the word is with can. Clear? What does your elimination knowledge tell you? The so-called tricks. If the word says can, it can be possible, right? UPSC will always have a watch on this kind of tricks, shortcuts. Please be very clear. It is not a new knowledge. Finally, it is now formalized by an official government document that we have hit a threshold. We can't do anything beyond this. This year's economic survey is beautiful for the reason that it's like they started acknowledging there is hardly anything that we have to do newly. Whatever administrative fix that is supposed to come, it's already there. We just have to focus on execution. This is what the survey is saying in almost every chapter. So there is a clear intent on the government side to pivot and move towards this new phase of our growth story. It's very obvious. So please be careful about that. Now, when you're talking about the productivity part, where are we focusing on? These are the areas. Let's begin with seeds. Because seeds is the first input that you have to think. If the very seed is of inferior quality, how can you expect productivity? What is the problem before this? Farmers used to get access to poor quality seeds. Okay. The poor quality seeds obviously will diminish yield after a certain time period. Access to high quality seeds where, let's say for example, if a certain genetically modified seed is there, it will have a terminator gene. The next offspring will not have the ability to produce seeds. So they will have to keep on procuring more and more seeds. To solve this problem, again we have to go back to the Amul model, where all the villages will combinedly create something called a seed bank and take custody over that biodiversity heritage. I'm calling it a heritage because if the same trend goes on after a few decades, you would not be witnessing the same level of diversity that we have today. And this environmentally sustainable solution, where we believe in the capacities of the people, is recognized. And that's why we have something called submission on seeds and planting materials under National Mission on High Yielding Varieties. So what is the agenda here? We are focusing on the aspirational districts, the poorest of the poor, and then we will slowly scale them up. In those areas, we will start seed banks, seed villages to be very precise. And the custody of those seeds is given to the entire village. History, if it were a testimony, when you give custody commonly to the entire public, it has been beautifully conserved. Take a look at the historical trajectory of almost everything. Believe in the capacities of the people. That's what the government is doing. So, the first step is taken care. Second one, water. What is the problem with water? Firstly, right from the word go, when agriculture took off after Green Revolution, the way we were dealing with water has been extremely inefficient. Take a look at the map across the country. Okay. Okay, so in this area, like if this is the peninsular region, the underlying rock is very hard. So you were primarily dependent on tank irrigation. Canals were very difficult. And in other parts like this area and even in Punjab, you were indiscriminately, extracting water out of the ground, which lead to a problem of salinity and water stress conditions. Why will this happen? Even though water cycles have a common cycle, like the time taken for replenishment, should be more than time taken for extraction. Only then it will become sustainable. What is happening? Just the opposite. So this leads to a so-called water stressed condition. And take a look at our choices. MSP based crops, cereal based crops, which require heavy waterlogging conditions. Even though they require heavy waterlogging conditions, we are applying more water than even the most water guzzling crops needed. So it is in this context we have had a scheme called Pradhan Mantri Krishi Sanchay Yojana, where we are focusing on efficiency for every drop of water through per drop more crop. It is in this context only the drip irrigation scheme came into the picture. As a technology, drip irrigation ultimately is about directly supplying the water to the root zone so that water is not wasted. Okay, I will stop that part here. Let's move to the next area. So what is the economic survey saying? If you take a look at the ROI out of all the productivity enhancement initiatives, survey says that if we have to intervene and invest somewhere, it is water harvesting, rejuvenating our water bodies. Just like how the state of Telangana was focusing on Mission Kakatiya by desilting the ponds so that water gets stored there. That same activity should be taken up by all the states across the country. Now here is my prediction on how UPSC can use this opportunity because of this single point, this single initiative, and also about how our government is approaching the entire knowledge systems with heavy emphasis on Indian knowledge traditions. Ancient water harvesting bodies, like say for example Ahar Pines, Eri, all the regional Baolis are wells in the western part of the country. All this will again come back into the news. So if your NCRT terminology is to be taken seriously, water harvesting structures, traditional water bodies, whatever they are across the country, they will become very important. My guess is, especially because this problem is more prevalent in, because they are beginning this program in the aspirational districts. Most of the aspirational districts which face this water stress are in Bihar. So it is in this context, Ahar, AHAR, this traditional water storage structures like techniques, they will become important. Second area is in the western coast near the water stressed areas of Maharashtra. Go and have a look if there are any such news items. You will find many news, Rajasthan areas also. Okay. Bishnoi community is famous for this Nadi or Nadi or whatever they will pronounce it as, Nadi. Moving forward, that is about the water harvesting part. Next, we are talking about the recommendations of survey with respect to fertilizers. What is the problem here? Problem is two kinds, economic, environment. When it comes to economics, what is the problem? Nearly 1 to 1.5% of our GDP is going away in subsidies for fertilizers. 0.0 to 1.5 across the decade, which is a huge cost. Okay, that's not supposed to be a problem because we are a welfare state. And I also told you that 46% of the population is just getting 18% GDP share. They're producing 18% GDP share. And I also told you that crop sector is growing at 5.5% only, 4 to 5.5%. Despite all the statistics, we are not getting the desired result. Why? Because we don't obey the laws of nature. Primarily, if you take a look at the soil profiles across the country, all soils lack a few nutrients. Most importantly, nitrogen. Nitrogen access is through urea. Because urea is a fertilizer which is important in the, this is a very overgeneralized statement, but I'm anyway making it so that you can see if there is a possibility of my claim. It's up to you to decide if my claim is right or wrong. In the plain regions of Uttar Pradesh, Punjab, where nitrogen is deficient, these farmers are the vote banks for central government politics back then. So, to ensure that these areas get cheap nitrogen fertilizer, urea was heavily subsidized. The market distorted the price. And since they can't do it only for one region across the country, this distortion happened. So, alluvial soils you are applying urea, okay, understood. But even in those areas where you require not just nitrogen but also phosphorus, potassium and other minerals, since those are expensive, the other minerals, they're expensive, farmers started indiscriminately applying the fertilizers in this other soils also. This is a historical trend. Way back in 2010, there is something called nutrient-based subsidy scheme, where there is a clear-cut bifurcation of how subsidies will be given for other nutrients versus urea. Urea was in the same old model where subsidy was given to the producers, but here for the other nutrients, the subsidy was given per kg. Since it is expensive, farmers did not apply it. They did not have a scientific approach to farming. So they started applying more and more urea, which damaged the soil quality further. It is in this context in 2014, in 2015, somewhere in that region, that time period, the government started taking the concept of soil health card much more seriously. So what started a decade ago is seeing the light of the day today. This is how the seeds that you sow in the early days will transpire to yield something very big. How? You already have Jan Dhan Yojana, which is bank accounts being opened for financial inclusion. Through that initiative, another initiative came, PM Kisan, which was intended to give direct benefit transfer to the farmers as an income support. Now the government suggests that we will stop this urea subsidy, which is indiscriminate, and tag it to the soil health card. If your soil requires certain fertilizer, only then apply it. And if you think you can't afford it, don't worry, government will directly give you money through PM Kisan route for fertilizer subsidy. This is what the economic survey says. I think it's a beautiful suggestion, a much needed one. Because if you continue to apply urea like this, the soil organic carbon, it will get distorted and land degradation will get amplified. Okay? One more thing. What to produce? We were talking about MSP as a problem for monocropping. And we always say we have to move in the direction of crop diversification. And at the same time, we are also saying that we have hit a threshold when it comes to land availability. Isn't it obvious that, let's say, if you have some X amount of land, you are saying that 100% is utilized. From that only, we have to divert the land for other areas too, right? Even if you want to move away from the traditional cereal based, it will have impact on incomes of the farmers as well as food security. So it's going to be a tapered, slow process only, not a sudden transition. Now, if I divert this, the problem will be not food security, because we are having oversupply here. And in other areas, you have undersupply. What are those other areas? Can we economically incentivize the farmers who are willing to let go of this area and divert to some other crops? The economic survey says there are two areas where you can focus. One is pulses and the other one is oilseeds. Because we are paying billions of dollars in trade for procuring oilseeds. In the present context, this is getting even more expensive because US dollar is now 92 rupees. Rupee is crashing. The reasons for rupee crash, will deal with that in the economics part. But right now, understand this. So, yesterday we have seen what are the areas recommended by survey? Andaman and Nicobar as well as Northeast. For what? Palm. Okay. Even in other areas, we are trying to improve the productivity part. Do you have anything for pulses? Yes. The government came up with a new roadmap called the Mission for Atmanirbharta in Pulses, where, of course, the same support which you require for enhancing the production of pulses will be given through this. That is the choice of crops, crop diversification part. Now we will be moving for what happens after harvest, storage structures, and then finally how to stop corruption in the domain of agriculture. These two areas. See, the problem we are talking about when it comes to corruption. Okay, I'll come back to this. Firstly, we'll finish this part. Storage should happen at the local level. It should not involve more costs by taking them from villages to the district headquarters, which will increase the logistic cost because you don't have access to cold storage and other infra there. Government wants to address this by PM Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana, which is trying to increase the storage facilities. So remember the purpose of respective schemes. We are trying to augment the storage of this PM Dhan Dhanya Krishi Yojana, and for this purpose we are utilizing the FPOs. Yesterday we were talking about FPOs. The difference between cooperatives and FPOs. I'll tell you. If there are a group of farmers, and they come and organize themselves into a cooperative, every one of them will have equal opportunity, equal votes. So this is democratic in nature. But the problem of cooperatives in farming sector is linked to the social realities, where this is not possible because of a major social problem, namely caste. This is the sociological understanding of why cooperatives didn't work as much in the farming sector. So an alternative for this is the farmer produce organizations, where unlike the democratic vote, it is dependent on how much you bring to the table. It's like a company. It's like you got some equity and your voting share will depend on how much you contribute to that. So if you can bring and agglomerate all these FPOs and hand over the responsibility of storage, seeds and other necessary inputs for agriculture, rural sector can definitely be revolutionized, so that there is less pressure on the suburban as well as urban areas. This is the vision of the economic survey. Now, how the tracking part happens when it comes to fertilizer subsidy. So there are some initiatives by the government which can be asked in prelims exam. Those are the points I mentioned here. IFMS lead, it is about the integrated fertilizer management system. Basically, you will have a real-time data on how every kg of fertilizer is moving. So that's how they will be tracking it. One more thing, if you see the word Shri Anna, basically we are talking about millets. The nomenclature, government nomenclature for millets now is Shri Anna. These are nutri cereals. And remember, now we are not talking about food security. We are talking about nutritional security, where even micronutrients are taken care of. Clear? So that is one more upgradation in nomenclature as well as intent from the government side. We discussed this part. Yeah. If you can see, what are the measures suggested? Here you can see Pashu Aadhar under the digital livestock mission, what we were discussing when we were talking about the animal husbandry sector. Okay. So these are some of the important points. Apart from this, there are some more areas that you have to focus on, namely credit and insurance. Of course, I will deal with this aspect in the next class, but I'm just giving you a direction. Why do we need insurance? Because vulnerable farmers, when a crop fails, the entire agricultural sector has been crashing. So the penetration of crop insurance is a major challenge. We have seen some growth in this area, Fasal Bima Yojana. Nearly 45 to 55% of the crops are now covered under this. And here also there is a wave of digitization to make this products, insurance products, by integrating even the private sector, much more accessible. I gave you the trend, the specific details we'll discuss in the next class. That's it for the day. Thank you.